Hello, I'm Jerry Hansen here at Pine Meadows Hobby Farm. This video presentation is a meeting we attended, and we were asked to share it with as many people as we could. This is on Cascadia, the great earthquake which residents in the Pacific Northwest, or basically along the west coast of the United States, are preparing for a October 15th shakedown. This is a drill that several entities, healthcare facilities, schools, government agencies, will be all participating in at a single moment on October 15th in preparation for the expected Great Pacific Northwest earthquake, which is caused by a slippage of the Cascadia fault line off the coast of Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. So I invite you to join me and watch this presentation by Dr. Althea Rizzo of the Oregon Department of Emergency Management. She gives a wonderful presentation on what the Cascadia is, what to expect, how to prepare, and being informed is utmost and number one, and being prepared is even more important.
Yeah, really. So, Dr. Rizzo.
Thank you, Phil, for giving me this opportunity to come down and talk to you about earthquakes, and thank you for giving me the gift of your time and coming to listen to me to talk about earthquakes. Like Phil said, my name is Althea Rizzo. I work for the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, and my job title is Geologic Hazard Program Coordinator, which is a great big long title, which basically means if the ground shakes, it's my problem, but it's not my fault. So what we're going to be talking about today is mostly Cascadia and the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And so there's some things that I kind of want to get out of the way before we even get started. How many people read the New Yorker article? So I thought we might share our toast recipes later. To paraphrase Ken Murphy, the regional administrator of FEMA Region 10, he basically was quoted in the article as saying everything west of I-5 is going to be toast. And what he meant when he said that was that we're all impacted in some way. It will not be toast. It will not be apocalyptica. But we will certainly all be impacted from Cascadia. And the New Yorker article is really good for raising the awareness about Cascadia to a national and really an international level. I mean, they were talking about that article on some BBC and the Guardian and some of the UK publications. So it's gotten a lot of interest, and the fact that we could pack a room in the middle of the day talking about it certainly, says that this is a very timely thing. So what we're talking about today is Cascadia subduction zone and what we can do to prepare. And one of the negatives that came out of that article is a lot of people got kind of scared about Cascadia and said, oh, I'm moving out of Oregon, and my house, there's the door, but there's more room for us. But you don't have to move out of Oregon because of Cascadia. It's not something that you have to leave town for, and I want to just kind of reassure people that there's a lot of things that we can do to get prepared for Cascadia, and that's what we're talking about today. So when we're thinking about Cascadia, we just really have to put it in the framework of all of the fact that we have natural hazards wherever we live. No matter where you live, you have natural hazards to deal with. And Cascadia is not our only one. How many people here have heard of wildland fires? We have other natural hazards besides Cascadia that we have to deal with. We have floods, we have fire, we have winter storms, we have Californians, we have all of those that we have to deal with in the way of natural hazards. And this is just the one that we're dealing with here and talking about today, because no matter where you go, you have natural hazards. If you live in Oklahoma, you have tornadoes. If you live in Florida, you have hurricanes. If you live in New York City, you have New York City. So no matter where you go, you have natural hazards to live with. And you're choosing to live in Oregon. I mean, we're a mobile culture. We can live anywhere we want to live. You're choosing to live with the Cascadia subduction zone. And that gives you a lot of power over how you respond and how you prepare for this. And so it's your choice, and really own that, and just learn what you can, do what you can, and then relax and enjoy Oregon and the beautiful scenery that we have here. So we do have 3 geologic hazards here in Oregon. We have earthquakes, we have tsunamis, and we have volcanoes. I'm not going to, can I get that shade kind of closed a little bit? That's really bright, thank you. Where was I? Oh yes, 3 hazards. So, not really going to talk about volcanoes much today, other than to tell you, no, Cascadia will not wake up a sleeping volcano. That just does not happen. If, however, we have a volcano that's ramped up, ready to go, and it's just waiting for that little nudge over the edge, Cascadia has a very, very small chance of being that nudge. So, no, it will not set off a volcano. It will not wake up Mount Mazama. So it just doesn't work that way. That's pretty much all I'm going to cover on volcanoes. So going back, and we'll talk a little bit about what is an earthquake. If you remember back to your 8th grade science class, you remember the Earth is like an egg with broken eggshell with these plates that are constantly moving around on the surface of the Earth. And we have plates that pull apart and create new land, plates that slide past each other, and we have plates that dive under each other, and that's called a subduction zone. And that's what we have right off of our coast. We have the Cascadia subduction zone, where we have the Juan de Fuca plate diving underneath the North American plate. And these plates are moving at about the rate your fingernails grow. And what we have is the Juan de Fuca plate diving underneath the North American plate, but when you have rocks rubbing against each other, they have a tendency to not slide very well. And we have a locked zone where they're not moving right there. But we still have these tectonic plates that are moving behind the locked zone. And so eventually, so much pressure will build up that rock will break. And when the rock breaks, it releases energy. That energy goes out through the Earth as seismic waves. And it's those seismic waves that we feel as ground shaking. Now, some of the processes that go on during the Cascadia subduction zone, so we have the locked area. And then over the centuries, the North American continent has actually risen. And in some places along the coast, the beaches have risen about 6 feet from this uplift over time. And during the earthquakes, the North American plate is going to shift west. And this is going to happen within a few seconds. And it's going to shift west anywhere from 30 to 50 feet. So we'll be closer to Hawaii. Maybe airfares will be cheaper in the future. But what happens is that relaxes the North American continent. And that uplift drops. And we have subsided. So suddenly, if you're sitting down at Gold Beach, you could suddenly find yourself 6 feet below sea level if you're on the beach because of subsiding. Another one of the factors that happens is when the North American plate springs west, it also has a tendency to spring up. And it's that uplift that causes the tsunami, and we'll talk more about that. So the tsunami is generated when the North American plate actually uplifts. And in Japan, it uplifted about 90 feet, which is why that tsunami was so big, because you lifted the ocean up 90 feet, and then it swooshes back down. And that swoosh is a technical term that scientists use all the time. And it's that swoosh that goes out over the ocean to become the tsunami. Now, we can get tsunami from anywhere around the Pacific Ring of Fire. That's a ring of subduction zones. And any one of those can send a tsunami our direction. And we really treat our Cascadia subduction zone tsunami and all of these other tsunamis as 2 different types of tsunami. A local tsunami, Cascadia, distant tsunami, anywhere else around there. And we're going to talk more about that because one's really a natural hazard and one is much more of a people hazard. So this is the Cascadia subduction zone. And this is what's going on right off of our shore. We have the Juan de Fuca plate diving underneath the North American plate, and then eventually that locked zone will release. Now, one thing to remember about the Cascadia subduction zone is that it's not one single monolithic fault. It's broken up into sections. So one section can go, or 2 sections can go, or the whole thing can go. We don't know which scenario it's going to be, so all of our planning is based on worst case 9.0 earthquake. But it's not a monolith. So we don't really know what size of earthquake we're going to be getting. What we do know is that it is 600 miles long. It runs from Northern California all the way up to British Columbia. We're friendly neighbors with Canada, so we share a subduction zone with them. But the thing to remember is the subduction zone, the Cascadia subduction zone, is not a discrete line that's sitting off of our coast, and so it stays off of our coast. The Tsunami plate is actually diving at about a 45-degree angle underneath the North American plate. And it ends where the Cascade Mountains are. In fact, the Cascade Mountains are the Tsunami plate. It gets down deep enough, melts, comes up through the cracks in the earth, and becomes those beautiful Cascade Mountains that we like to hike on in the summer and ski on in the winter. So this whole system is connected. And it's a very large area that's going to be impacted when this thing goes from Northern California all the way up to British Columbia. They're going to feel it in eastern Oregon. If it's the 9.0, they could feel it in Montana. If it is 9.0, it's capable of bringing buildings down in Baker City. So it's a very, very large event, and when it happens, it's going to affect the entire western United States. When we look at the subduction zones, we know that these are capable of producing the largest earthquakes in the world. Anytime you hear of an earthquake over a 7.5, you almost always know that it's a subduction zone, because it simply takes this fault size to create that big of an earthquake. We know they produce very large earthquakes, and we can look to the fault zone from the 2004 in Sumatra event and the 2011 Japanese event for what we can expect to see here in the Pacific Northwest from both the earthquake and from the tsunami that's going to be coming in shortly after the earthquake. Now, one question that I frequently get asked is, when is the next one? And I intend to schedule the next one when I'm in Hawaii sometime. But the honest answer is we don't know when the next earthquake is going to be. No matter what you read on the internet, you cannot predict earthquakes. Our science is simply not there yet. We can study them, we can measure them, we can see stress building up, but we don't know what all of that means yet, and we're just not capable of predicting when we're going to have these earthquakes. What we do have is a geologic record, and what we have is a 10,000-year geologic record of over 41 of these large earthquakes in the last 10,000 years. And so when we look at this recurrence between these earthquakes, on the southern portion rupture scenario, the average recurrence rate is 240 years, and it's been 315 years since the last one. So Chris Goldfinger of Oregon State University, go Bees, recently completed a study that said that we have about a 37% chance in the next 50 years of having a southern Oregon scenario earthquake. That's huge. That's a very, very large number. So we can't predict when the next one is going to be. We do know that the last one happened at 9 p.m. on January 26th in the year 1700. And how we know this is there was not somebody sitting on Facebook, recording it. It's actually a geologic mystery story, and it's kind of fascinating how all of these different things came together. Dr. Brian Atwater, who works for the USGS up in Seattle, is a geologist up there, and he studies mud offshore for evidence of earthquakes and stuff like that. And he was up on the Palos River doing some research about the mid-1980s, and he discovered a ghost forest up there. And so basically this was a forest of dead spruce that had dropped into and became a salt marsh. Now, he was a bright guy, so he knew that at some point the ground had to be higher so that those trees could germinate and grow to maturity before they actually dropped down. And because he was a geologist, he knew that a subduction zone earthquake could cause that ground subsidence, dropping it down so that the roots were in the salt marsh and killed trees all at the same time. So he did some radiocarbon dating and some dendrochronology studies and found that they had died plus or minus 50 years around the year 1700. And then he was at a scientific conference with some colleagues a short time after that in Japan, and found out that the Japanese have been keeping records of their tsunamis for over 1,000 years. Now, Brian's a really bright guy, so he taught himself enough medieval Japanese to look through their records, and he found records of what they call an orphan tsunami, which is a tsunami that they don't have an earthquake that they can associate with it. The tsunami killed 10,000 people in Japan. Happened on January 26th in the year 1700. And so Brian knew that he had his smoking gun, and that was our last Cascadia subduction zone. So we know exactly when the last one happened. What we don't know is when the next one. We have averages. We know that on average, every 240 years for the southern rupture. If we look at the entire rupture, about 500-600 years between. But Chris also found that as little as 190 years was between earthquakes, or as much as 1,200 years. So there's a great amount of variability. So the answer to the question is, when is the next one? We don't know. And the answer really should be is, well, we do know that it's going to happen again, and it's going to happen over and over again. So when we look at Chris's 41 earthquakes along a time scale across the top here, you can kind of see that they're all fairly evenly spaced out there. There is no statistical significance to any visual clustering that you might think you see there. It's not statistically significant. We don't have a large enough sample to say one way or another that these earthquakes come in clusters. But humans, we're pattern-seeking animals. We like to impose order on chaos, and we like to make patterns. And I have a really contrary brain, and it wants to put a big fat red line where it says you are here. So we don't know how to predict these. So we don't know that they're happened before, and we know that they're going to happen again. If we look at the bottom part of the screen, this is another way at looking at those 41 earthquakes. Half the time it was a full margin rupture. On the left there, we have the full margin rupture. Those are the 9.0 earthquakes. The other half of the time, it was some selection of those other blocks that went. And it could be a single block down here on the southern portion. Those small earthquakes, those are 7.6 to 8.4. That will still impact you here in Medford from that event. Then they kind of just go up in size as we add much more rupture. So this is the scenario. We've got a 50-50 chance that it's going to be the full margin rupture. We've got a 37% chance in the next 50 years that we'll have some sort of very large earthquake. What we do know is they've happened before. They'll happen again. So what happens during a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake? Well, obviously there is going to be a lot of strong ground shaking. And this is really where our built environment, how well we build stuff or how well we don't build stuff, is really going to make a difference in how quickly we're going to be able to recover from a Cascadia event. Up here we have a tale of two earthquakes. We have on the left Haiti, a 7.0 earthquake. Killed 250,000 people because their building stock collapsed. Very poor country, very, very poor country, one of the poorest in the world. And they have no building control. There's no standards, there's no codes, there's no inspection. People just build as they can. And their building stock basically crumbled and killed 250,000 people. On the right, we have Japan. We have a modern country. We have a country that was pretty much bombed back to the Stone Age during World War II that has spent the last 50 years rebuilding with these types of earthquakes in mind. Because they get these earthquakes much more frequently than we do here in the U.S. So they're very familiar with them and they know how to build for them. Now, as awful as the loss of life was, 15,000 people, in many ways that was a success story because 97% of the people who died from drowning. Only 3% died from earthquake-related injuries. And so really, very few people actually died from the earthquake. And they were mostly back up and running. Their telecommunication, their transportation systems, their power systems were pretty much back up and running at 80 to 90% within a few weeks. So those are two models that we can choose. We can choose to be Haiti and not do anything about our seismic risk, or we can choose to be Japan and be able to recover quickly. Now, some of the impacts that we're going to be talking about today, it's where we are today. This is not where we're going to be when this thing happens in 50 or 60 years, hopefully. We hope Mother Nature gives us time to do the retrofits that we need to do. The snapshot is where we are today, not where we're going to be when this thing actually happens. So another one of the questions that I frequently get is, if it's a 9.0 out there at the subduction zone, what's the magnitude here? And the answer is, well, it's still a 9.0. What we really measure is intensity of shaking, because quite honestly, that's what's going to matter to you the most, is how much is it shaking where I am right now. And we use Roman numerals and words to describe that kind of measurement, called the modified Mercalli scale. And so you can have slight, flexible, strong, rather strong, severe, destructive, all the way up to extreme. And it's when you start to get into the strong to severe shaking that you start to see poorly built buildings have issues. When you start to get up into severe is where you start to see well-built buildings start to have issues. And this is a shaking intensity model for the Medford area from a 9.0 earthquake. So you can see that there are pockets of severe shaking, even this far inland from a 9.0 earthquake. So even though it is 100 miles offshore and you're 100 miles from the coastline, you still will be impacted here in the valley from this. Now you can go to OregonGeology.org/HAZView, OregonGeology.org. There's a lot of really good information. And you can type in your address and zoom in a lot closer. And there's all kinds of natural hazards on that online viewer that you can find out about where you live or where you work. But the takeaway here is Cascadia will affect us here in the valley. It's not the issue over on the coast. It's not just the tsunami, but we will also have the earthquake to deal with. Another one of the earthquake hazards that we're going to deal with are landslides. Now, I don't have to tell folks in Oregon much about landslides. We get a winter storm, somebody sneezes, and we have landslides. The issue is we're finding more and more unmapped landslides all the time. The GAMI, the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, just recently completed a new landslide survey of Curry County. Now, before the study, there were 300 mapped landslides after 3,000. So we're finding, as mapping is getting better and better, and they're applying the LIDAR data, we're finding more and more of these landslides. Now the issue here is that all of our transportation systems are susceptible to damage from a Cascadia-induced landslide. And this is an issue because we're a just-in-time society. Everything that we purchased at the store probably got to that store within the last 3 days. The food that you ate this morning, unless you raised it locally, came into Oregon probably in the last 3 days. So that means if our road systems are damaged, and they will be damaged by the Cascadia subduction zone, it could be weeks to months before our transportation systems. They're expecting the routes between I-5 and 101 to be down for 3 to 5 years. That's how long it's going to take to repair those roadways so that we can get consumer travel on those roadways. We will be able to get emergency supplies through. We're going to get road graders and bulldozers up there, and we'll punch a road through, but it won't be what we're used to. Another one of the hazards that we're going to be dealing with is liquefaction. Now, this is where you have sandy, unconsolidated soil that during the shaking, if it's saturated with water, it can turn to pudding. And buildings don't sit very well in pudding. They have a tendency to sink down into it. But things that are buried, like sewer systems or fuel tanks or septic systems, can shake up out of the ground. And this is a real severe impact on our underground utilities. Christchurch, which had a very large earthquake in 2011, some of their subdivisions, their residential areas, were without sewer systems and water systems for over 2 years. And so it could be that long before we get our sewer systems back up and running if they're not retrofitted ahead of time. And in fact, some areas in Christchurch are being returned to green space because it's just too expensive and they can't engineer to withstand the level of liquefaction that they have expected in that area. So land use planning becomes a huge tool in avoiding areas that are subject to liquefaction. Anywhere where you have sandy, unconsolidated soil, which is basically river bottom kind of soil, could be at risk for liquefaction. And so this is a soft soils map of the Medford area. And again, you can see that there is quite a bit of area that's susceptible or vulnerable to liquefaction. And again, this is some of the information that you can get off of HazView. So another one of the hazards that we deal with is the tsunami. Now, you may be wondering why I'm talking to folks in Medford about tsunami. No, the tsunami will not come over the mountains, no matter what you may have heard on Shep Smith's show after the New Yorker article came out. We will not have 600-foot waves coming over the mountains, I promise you. If we have 600-foot mountains or waves coming over the mountains, tsunami is really the least of your worries. It will come up a few miles up the coastal rivers. Up the Sayusala, it might make it to Mableton, depending on water conditions, but it's not going to inundate very far up the rivers. So, tsunamis are a hazard that we are going to be facing, and we really need to understand the fact that we get two types of tsunamis here in the Pacific Northwest. We get the Cascadia local tsunami and the distant tsunami caused by a subduction zone earthquake somewhere else. And our response to them are entirely different. A distant tsunami, remember, is coming from somewhere else. And so it's important to know that our response doesn't mean getting up high out of the ground right now. We have time before it gets here. NOAA can give us hours and hours of warning depending on where that tsunami is coming from. Our closest source is the Alaskan Aleutian Islands, and that's 4 hours away. Now, if you hear we're getting a tsunami from the Alaskan Aleutian Islands, you might perk up, because that really is our worst-case scenario for a distant, and the largest Alaskan Aleutian Island scenarios is about the equal of the smallest Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, and those can give us about 30-foot waves, depending on where it's coming from. But on the most part, distant tsunamis are really a people hazard. People respond, they hear tsunami, and they freak out, and they hop in their cars, and they drive crazy, trying to drive to Portland or Salem at 3:30 in the morning, when really all they have to do is get away from the water for a while. We had injury accidents after the March 11th event, 2011, because people were hearing tsunami. They got in their cars and tried to drive to Portland over icy roads in the middle of March, in the middle of the night. So basically, if you hear that you were having a tsunami, I mean, how many people heard ahead of time that we were having a tsunami? How did you hear about it? It's okay to raise your hand, I promise. You don't get an answer, right?
Television news.
Television news. Everybody hear about it on Facebook, NPR, radio, TV. Aunt Martha called you from Ohio. There's a lot of ways that we can get that information. The National Weather Service is very good about letting us know really fast whether or not we're having a tsunami. And if we're having a tsunami, there's very little area that actually has to be inundated. And you just go hang out at the brew pub or the cafe up the hill for a few hours until they let you back down into the beach area. It's really not a huge natural hazard like the local tsunami is. And there's plenty of warning, plenty of time. Finish your coffee, then get to high ground. So when it comes to going to the next slide, we have difficulties. So what the next slide is going to say once it goes back up and running is our local response. A response to a local tsunami is much different because the earthquake is your only warning. We have about 15 to 25 minutes before those first tsunami waves come in. And the National Tsunami Warning Center doesn't have enough time to send out a warning. The earthquake is your only warning. So you feel the earthquake, you drop cover in your hole, and you get yourself to high ground as soon as you possibly can. And the thing to remember is nobody is going to give you a warning. You must self-evacuate. There's going to be no sirens. There's going to be no Aunt Martha calling you from Hawaii. You just need to know that you need to evacuate as soon as you can, and as high as you can, and as fast as you can. Sorry, guys. We're going to try this again. Okay, so remember, you feel the ground shake, you drop cover and hold, and you get to high ground because it's coming in within 15 to 25 minutes. If you're at Cape Blanco, about 8 minutes. If you're in Astoria, about an hour. So just remember, there's going to be no warning, and you have to get to high ground quickly. Now, one thing to remember about a subduction zone earthquake is that it's not a single event that happens and then we recover from quickly. It takes centuries to build up this pressure and this stress. And a single earthquake is not going to release all of that energy in one go. It's going to take decades, if not hundreds of years, to release all of that stress again. So we will be getting aftershocks. There was almost constant aftershocks for the first few weeks after the Japanese event. And some of those aftershocks were as high as an 8.0, and some of them generated secondary tsunamis. And the thing to remember is the rupture zone was way up north for the Japanese event, but notice that the aftershocks are hundreds of miles away. And so if you survive the main shock just fine, you could get a 5 or 6 underneath Medford, and that will do much more damage than the initial rupture offshore. So what sometimes happens is during that main shock, things get weakened, but they may not fall down, and sometimes it's those aftershocks that cause a collapse. That's what happened in Christchurch. The Christchurch earthquake was actually an aftershock of an earthquake from a few months earlier in the Canterbury area. So a lot of those buildings had been damaged invisibly, but when they had the aftershock under Christchurch, that's what brought the buildings down. So every time we have one of these aftershocks, buildings and bridges have to be re-inspected. So it puts a tremendous strain on local resources, on being able to get out there and do the inspections every time we have one of these major aftershocks. But it's not just our infrastructure and our local resources that are going to be stressed. You know, if it was just one earthquake, we would probably be okay. What they find is that PTSD is a huge issue after these subduction zone earthquakes because the ground is going to be moving under your feet for months afterwards. People find it difficult to sleep indoors. Children become very fragile and need a lot of special care. Our elders need special help. So PTSD is going to be an issue after a Cascadia subduction zone, and that's why it's really important to understand the long-term nature of this event ahead of time so you can wrap your head around it and not be surprised and dismayed when it actually does happen. So what are we planning for when it comes to Cascadia? Well, we want to plan for the worst-case scenario. We want to know how bad it could possibly get, and that's what we're planning for. So we're planning for the 9.0 earthquake. We're planning for the full rupture scenario. We're planning for the very bad tsunami. We have 3 metropolitan areas in the impact zone. We have Portland, Seattle, and we include British Columbia. We're starting to include Sacramento and San Francisco into these numbers because the seismic waves don't stop at the Oregon-California border. So they could cause damage down as far south as San Francisco. So that's a large number of people that are going to be impacted. And we're going to have about 15 to 20 million people that are going to have no power for weeks to months to years after this event. No fuel for weeks to months to years. Because remember, we get our liquid fuel, about 90% of our liquid fuel comes from one refinery in Anacortes, Washington. That fuel comes down through one pipeline. That one pipeline crosses 15 rivers and then goes into the Port of Portland, into facilities that are built in the 40s and 50s before we knew about plate tectonics, let alone the Cascadia subduction zone. And then it's shipped out either by pipeline or by truck to the local areas. So the fuel you have in your rig is probably the fuel you're going to have for about 6 months. It's going to take that long before we can get systems of distribution up and running so that you as a consumer can go down and get maybe a gallon or two on some sort of ration basis. You're not going to be able to drive very far. Our roadways are going to be so severely impacted that, basically you're going to be living the island life. You're just not going to be able to drive very far. So have a good pair of shoes in. So what is Oregon going to look like? Remember, I said this is a snapshot of where we are today. And this is the snapshot that the Oregon Resilience Plan addressed in its 50-year retrofit program concept. This is, doing 2% every year for 50 years means we'll be 100% ready in 50 years. We hope Mother Nature gives us this. So what is Oregon going to look like after Cascadia? Well, it's not going to be Thunderdome. As much as I would rock that outfit, it is not going to be Thunderdome. There are going to be pockets of areas where, no building will be touched. It won't look like anything happened. You won't have any power, you won't have any water. But for the most part, Oregonians, we're resilient, we're tough. No matter even if we're not prepared when it happens, we will get through this one way or another. One of the issues, one of the vulnerabilities that we do have is that all of our built environment was built before we had seismic codes. Our first seismic codes were put in place in the 1990s. Most of our schools, our hospitals, our first responder facilities were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s. So that means that our infrastructure is vulnerable to damage during this, and that's something that we need to address. Now, the state legislature did pass some great legislation over this last session. One of them was to provide $175 million for this biennium to retrofit schools, hospitals, and responder facilities, and there'll be an equal amount the next biennium. We don't know if they're going to continue that trend out in the out years. Another one of the pieces of legislation that they did was to approve local communities' ability to create special districts so that they could tax themselves and offer seismic retrofit programs to their downtown areas. Because really our downtowns, the beautiful brick buildings, there's coffee shops, there's cafes, there's that funky little boutique. Those are the hearts of our communities. And many communities, if that disappeared, their community would disappear. I mean, think about what would happen to Ashland if their downtown was leveled. There would be no reason for the community. So we really need to rethink how we protect our historical assets like that. And the legislature has given us a great tool in doing that. So when we think about preparedness, quite honestly, we're more prepared than we think we are. I mean, how many people here, I know this is a loaded question in this audience, but how many people here camp or hunt or fish or garden or talk to your neighbors? All of those things build resiliency. If you go camping, you've got everything you probably need to live outside of your house for an extended period of time. If you garden or can, you've got resiliency there. So we're more resilient than we think we are. It's just a matter of kind of twisting our thinking and coming at it from a different direction and coming at it with purpose of getting prepared. And the important thing really is you start to think about it. I mean, this is new information for a lot of people. How many people have never been to a presentation on Cascadia or preparedness before? That's awesome. I like to see that. The important thing is you don't keep this information to yourself. It does us no good. And so what I would really challenge you guys to do is take this message to someone else today. By the time you go to bed tonight, do one thing to make yourself and someone else more prepared. It could be a post on Facebook, hey, I went to a preparedness thing, you guys should go to the preparedness thing tonight at Medford, or talent, or go to talk to your fire department. Resilient. I mean, we ride bikes, we hunt, we fish, we camp, we do all these sorts of things. We know our neighbors. We do a lot of the things that build the resilient systems that we're going to be relying on after an event like this. So when we think about preparedness, there's kind of some steps that we can go through. And the publication, Living on Shaky Ground, which is in the back there, has more information. But when you're thinking about getting prepared, really do the easy stuff first. Make sure that things are not going to fall on you during the earthquake. The most common injury in the U.S. during an earthquake is stuff falling on us. The buildings are not falling on us. It's the stuff inside the buildings, like the light fixtures, the fan, the projector. So it's the stuff that falls on us. Our bookshelves, our Aunt Martha's hutch, all of the things in our homes that it doesn't take much money or time to connect it to the wall. You can go to the hardware store, get some $1.50 L bracket, and tie those bookshelves or the hutch to the wall. It doesn't cost much money, but that bookshelf or that hutch won't fall on you and cause an injury after an event like this. Another thing that you can do is tie your water heater down. The kit's at the hardware store, about $20. Takes about an hour to do. Even I can do it. And not only is that not going to fall down and not cause a fire, gas, water heater, that's 50 to 60 gallons of potable water right there that will come in very handy after the event. So you don't want to lose your water heater. So simple things like that. Fix what you can around your home. Do the same thing in your office. Just take common sense ideas. Put the toilet paper on the top and the cast iron on the bottom. Just simple things like that. Creating a disaster plan. Remember, I challenged you to talk to someone tonight about preparedness. Take it a step further as you go on. Create a disaster plan. Know who has to contact whom. How many people have children that are at school somewhere else? Okay? Do they have to cross the bridge? Do you have to go over the viaduct? Is there something that could prevent you from getting back together? One thing you might consider is find out what kind of safety plan the kids' school has. They may be better off just staying there in school until you can get to them. Finding out what the safety plans there, finding out if the buildings have been retrofitted. If they haven't been retrofitted, consider helping them apply for the grants inside the retrofit grant program and get retrofitted. Figure out where you're going to meet, how you're going to get there. When are you going to meet? You might just say, I'm not planning on trying to get anywhere for 3 days because I'm going to be helping the people in my immediate area. You're going to be helping people immediately around you. So you may tell your family, expect me in 3 days. And that's honestly quite realistic, depending on how far you have to go. There's a lot of tools that you can use to create these emergency plans. You've got Living on Shaky Ground. There's some really good online smartphone apps. American Red Cross has one that you can use. If you go over to the coast, there's an online viewer that you can download the tsunami evacuation map before you go. Find out if your hotel or B&B is in the inundation zone. So you have that information before you go. So you can make these plans. Other tools you can use, ready.gov also has a mobile app that you can use. There's also a business toolkit for thinking about continuity of operations after an event like this. So there's a lot of really good information out there. No one is really better than the others. It's just really important that you do something, that you use one of them to create your plan. So 3 things that you can do today. I want you to pick 2 of them to do today. Start a conversation. It could be in person when you guys stop for coffee on the way home or stop at the brew pub. Find out what their emergency plan is, because it's really important to have caffeine after something like this, trust me. If you don't want me decaffeinated. So I carry caffeine tabs in my go kit. So start a conversation. It could be over the dinner table. It could be online. Just have a conversation with somebody. Get your out-of-state contacts into your phone, and then put old shoes underneath your bed. Because if it happens at night, what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of broken glass, a lot of broken lumber, and if you don't have shoes by your bed, flashlight and a leather glove, you could get cuts on your feet. And trust me, that would suck, because if you have to walk to the hospital, which is what you would have to do with injured feet, that would not be making for happiness. So take an old pair of shoes, a pair of leather gloves, a flashlight, stick them in a shopping bag, tie them to your bed somehow. That way, you're that much more prepared. It doesn't cost you anything. Again, they're things you probably already have in your home. Pick two and do today. And then do the third within a week. So when we look at disaster kits and having supplies, this is where people start to shake their heads and go, oh, I can't get 2 weeks worth of supplies, But the answer is most people have 2 to 3 weeks worth of food in their home. You may get tired of tuna fish and ketchup, but you have probably 2 weeks worth of food in your home. The idea is just to be a little bit more deliberative about it and to distribute it, because how many people have a generator at home? Or extra food? Or extra, like a first aid kit? Are you at home now? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how prepared you are at home if that's your only place your supplies are. So, we all grew up knowing about the 3-hour kit. That's great. Everybody should have a 3-hour kit. You live in wildland country. You may need to bug out at any time. But you should have 7 to 10 days in your vehicle. Because we're Americans, our vehicles are usually with us or near us at some point. We really love our vehicles. So that gives you 7 to 10 days plus your 3-day go kit. So you've almost got 2 weeks worth of supplies right there. If you keep another 7 days here at the office and you got your car here and your 3-day kit, bam, you've got your 2 weeks worth of supplies right there. So if you break it off in small chunks, you can do it that way. And just make sure to distribute it out over different places. Now, if you have a great supply cache at home, make sure your neighbors know how to get into it. Make sure you know how to get into the neighbor's supply cache. Because if you're here and you're not able to get back to your supplies or your things, it makes no sense for them to not be used by somebody if you can't get back to them. And it's the same thing as if they're not there, it makes no sense for their supplies. We're going to be in this together. We can't do it alone. We're going to rely on each other afterwards. Because really, by either preparing or choosing not to prepare, you're making a decision about where you want to live after this. If you are able to take care of yourself, if you have prepared, you will be able to stay in your home. You will be able to stay in Oregon. If you cannot take care of yourself, it is very likely that you will end up much like the Katrina refugees somewhere else. You'll end up in the Astrodome in Oklahoma. I've been to Oklahoma. You don't want to do that. So this is the choice you are making by either making these preparations or not making these preparations. You are making this choice for your family each and every time you do something right or you do something wrong. So make sure you don't end up in Oklahoma, please. We want to make sure you guys stay here. The thing to remember is after an event like this, you're not going to be able to pick up the phone and call 911 and have someone come out and help you. Remember, the responders are victims too, and they're going to be helping people where they are as they can. So we're really going to be our own first responders, and that's why one of the most important things I think we can do for this legacy of resilience is make sure that every single one of our high school students graduate with a first aid certificate. Promoting ham radio in our high schools, doing these kinds of things that give our children this kind of legacy that we may need to rely on. they could be the ones saving our lives after an event like this. So I want that to sink in for a little bit. So getting that first aid training is going to be really important because we are going to be our own first responders. Thinking about shelter and warmth. Last time this happened in January, March in Japan, this is some elders sitting around trying to stay warm. If it happened today, we would have difficulty staying warm. You know, it's what, 50, 60 out there. So having shelter, having warmth will be really important. Thinking about water, it could be as low-tech as a drinking straw, or it could be some kind of water storage or purification system at your home. Everybody's solution is going to be different. It's going to be unique to them. And then food. Now, food's where you really start to get individual. When it comes to food, you could go out and buy these bricks of calories. They're basically, flavored sawdust. And, that might be kind of exciting that first day. I get my emergency supplies and looking at the 30 years But trust me, that will get really old really fast. For myself, I don't keep bricks of calories. I have a brick of calories in my Go Kit. But at home, I keep red beans, I keep rice, I keep quinoa, I keep stewed tomatoes and chicken broth and spices, things that I eat. It's simply a pantry that has about 3 weeks worth of red beans and rice. It's easy to cook. I can feed a lot of people cheaply, and because the plan is to, feed my neighbors if necessary. And it's not anything that's out there. It's not a sacred space. It is simply food that I have that is going to last me a few weeks. And I know my family likes it, and I know how to cook it. Sanitation, what comes in must go out. The public health departments are starting to advocate for a 2-bucket system, wet and dry. I highly recommend that you do some Googling and figure out how that works. Sanitation can be as simple as a 5-gallon bucket and a pool noodle. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it's something that we really will need to address. After Haiti, there was a secondary disaster of the dysentery. So we want to make sure that that does not happen here. And then, of course, first aid and medication. We have a lot of individuals, elders, that, you have some kind of medical device or medication need. And the state legislature, one of the other things that they did this last session was pass the law. They haven't written the rules for us. We don't know how it's going to shake out. But it directs insurance companies to provide a limited schedule of medication for an additional 30-day supply. If it's something like insulin and things like that that you have to have every single day, insurance companies will be required to give you an emergency 30-day supply that you can keep and rotate through. But there's other ways that you can build up that supply over time. I use Walgreens as my pharmacy, and 2 weeks before I have to refill, they send me an email. And it says, respond to this email and we'll refill your prescription. And I can go pick up the next day. That's 2 weeks early. Now, these are not, absolutely life-saving medications. They're more chronic things. But that means I can build up a store over time, and I just have to remember to rotate through and respond to that email in a timely manner so that I can build up that supply. So there are ways that you can do that. So looking at your home and how to get that prepared, most of our homes, if they've been built since 2000 or so, will probably do pretty well. They're bolted to the foundations. They've had their purple walls. That's that short span between the foundation and the first floor. And they don't have unreinforced masonry chimneys. If your house was built before the 1990s, it was probably not bolted to the foundation. And if houses are prepared properly, they tend to do very well in these types of earthquakes. And you want to be able to sleep in your own bed at night. You don't want to have to go to some shelter. And so it's not a huge thing to make some of these retrofits. You can, FEMA has a great publication. You can Google for that. It's just Seismic Home Retrofit FEMA, and you can download a document. And a lot of the fixes can be done by homeowners if you're at all handy. The average retrofits are $5,000 to $10,000. you'll pay 2 to 3 times that for a new kitchen. So, you know, when you're going in and retrofitting one thing, consider doing the seismic retrofit, because you want to be able to stay in your home after something like this. And then during the earthquake, we promote drop, cover, and hold. This is where you get down underneath something. You hold on to it because it's going to be bouncing and moving around with you, and then you get through the earthquake. You don't want to try to run out of a building because there's a lot of fascia and a lot of stuff on the outside of our buildings. You can be breaking glass. For one thing, there's up to a G's force of coming through that can throw you to the ground. I mean, the force of these earthquakes can make it so you can't walk, and make it throw you to the ground so hard that you can break limbs. So we want to make sure that people are dropping right away and practicing this. It's important to do the practicing because you're not going to be sinking during this kind of an event. And then evacuate if necessary. If you're down at the beach, know that you have to get to high ground as soon as possible. And then follow your earthquake plan. Stuff that you've already practiced several times. So when we're looking at Oregon after this, it really will be a new normal. I mean, how clever, I mean, really, what else do you need? So it really will be a different way of living after this. And you're making this choice every single day, whether you're preparing or not preparing, or talking to people and sharing the message. One thing that we do recommend everyone in Oregon participate in is the Great Oregon Shakeout. We want all Oregonians dropping, covering, and holding underneath their desks at the same time in October. We're going to have about 17 million people between California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia under our desks at the same time. It's going to be a party. You should be there. You can go to shakeout.org/Oregon. Sign up and register. We'll send you some great information on how to get prepared and how to do this drill. Our goal is to get 500,000 Oregonians to do this. We're currently at 350,000, so we're almost there, just shy of a month. So highly recommend that you check that out. So this is my contact information. Are there any questions?
You mentioned your Ann Arbor, Ohio.
Yeah, 555-1234. But that is, everyone has somebody backing that they can leverage. And like I said, make a Facebook group tonight and have this conversation with a bunch of people and get that information into your smartphone so that if it happens, we all are familiar with the ICE in case of emergency number. The cops know to look for ICE on your phone. This is another thing that people will know where to look for. One, EQ text. It's simple, it's easy. I'm okay, I'm in West Medford helping my neighbors. And then Aunt Martha, when people do contact her, can tell people they're okay. It may be weeks before you actually get back in contact with family locally. In case of emergency, if you put the contact, so if you get in an accident, the police department can call in case of emergency. That's your contact person. Yeah. One question. Don't make me ask you questions. Yes.
Not a question, but thank you. Very good job.
Thank you.
Very informative.
So what are you guys going to do today? What's your one action that you're going to do today? Okay. Awesome. So, yeah.
One thing I noticed, my house insurance coverage doesn't cover earthquake.
Right. So the question was about earthquake insurance. Your standard homeowners insurance does not cover earthquake. However, the insurance companies, if your house is older than 1975, I believe, they will require you to do some of these retrofitting. It costs about $1,000 a year to do earthquake insurance, but it could mean the difference between you being able to rebuild and not being able to rebuild. We just bought a 1948 log home, so we got work cut out for us. So, yeah.
Is there any information about the Rogue Valley and like the state that the bridges are in and what would happen if an earthquake happened with the dams and the bridges around here?
Yeah, pretty much if the bridge was not built within the last couple of decades, assume that it's not going to be usable.
Because if you figure out where you go every day around here, how many bridges do you cross across the creeks and the rivers and the streams around here?
Right, and so the other part of that question was about the dams. And dams don't tend to fail catastrophically during that main event. Sometimes it's later and they have to dump water to avoid because there's been damage to the dams. But there is the possibility of catastrophic failure. And the Corps of Engineers is going to be at the city of Medford next Wednesday. And you can come down, you can schedule a time and talk to someone from the Corps of Engineers to find out if you are downstream from one of the dams, and they'll walk you through the inundation maps. But you have to pre-register because they want to make sure they have enough staff on hand. You can go to the city of Medford or Jackson County Emergency Management and find out more information there. To go back to the insurance for a second, the federal FEMA flood insurance does cover tsunami damage. So if you own a beach home, for instance, and you have FEMA flood insurance, it will be covered if you have a tsunami. So yay. So we have a few door prizes to give away. Can we have someone bringing up the...
I want to thank Dr. Rizzo for her presentation. It was very informative. And I hope that you find at least the minimum amount of preparations in your home or even outside of your home if your home should be shaken apart during this event. So no matter where you live, you can prepare because an event could happen to you. Like Dr. Rizzo said, it's not necessarily a volcano or an earthquake. It could be a winter storm, a flood. It could be a number of things that come your way. I'm Jerry Hansen, your host, and I want to thank you for coming.